Welcome to this review of psychosocial development in emerging and young adulthood. In this review, you'll learn about personality in early adulthood and the five-factor theory of personality. You'll also learn about attachment styles and the potential for our early attachment relationships to influence our adult relationships. You'll also learn about the influences on interpersonal attraction and the factors that play a role in mate selection. You'll learn too about Erikson's stage of intimacy versus isolation and how earlier stages of psychosocial development can influence one's success in this stage. You'll also be learning about some of the reasons for the gradual decline over the past few decades in the number of children that couples are having, and why many people are choosing to have children later in life. And then we'll be taking a look at some of the key factors that influence parenting. A well-known personality theory within the field of psychology is the Big Five-factor theory. Today, many researchers believe that there are 5 core personality traits. Evidence of this theory has been growing for many years. And a substantial amount of research has been conducted examining the role of these traits on a variety of our behaviors. The Big Five are broad categories of personality traits. While there's a significant body of literature supporting this 5-factor model of personality, researchers don't always agree on the exact labels for each dimension. You might find it helpful to use the acronym OCEAN for openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism as you're trying to remember the Big Five traits. It's important to note that each of the 5 personality factors represents a range between 2 extremes. For example, extroversion represents a continuum between the extreme extroversion and the extreme introversion. In the real world, most people lie somewhere in between the 2 polar ends of each dimension. These 5 categories are usually described as follows. First, let's look at openness. This trait features characteristics like imagination and insight. People who are high in this trait also tend to have a broad range of interests. They're curious about the world and other people, and they're eager to learn new things and enjoy new experiences. People who are high in this trait also tend to be more adventurous and creative, whereas people who are low in this trait often tend to be much more traditional, and many struggle with abstract thinking. Let's take a look at conscientiousness. Standard features of this dimension include high levels of thoughtfulness, good impulse control, and goal-directed behaviors. Highly conscientious people tend to be organized and mindful of details. They plan, they think ahead, and they think about how their behavior affects others, and they're mindful of deadlines. Let's look at extroversion. Extroversion is characterized by excitability, sociability, talkativeness, assertiveness, and high amounts of emotional expressiveness. People who are high in extroversion are outgoing, and they tend to gain energy in social situations. Being around other people helps them feel energized and excited. People who are low in extroversion, or who we might say are introverted, tend to be more reserved, and they tend to have less energy to expend in social settings. Social events can feel draining, and introverts often require a period of solitude and quiet in order to recharge after these social situations. Let's now look at agreeableness. This personality dimension includes attributes such as trust, altruism, kindness, affection, and other prosocial behaviors. People who are high in agreeableness tend to be more cooperative, while those who are low in this trait tend to be more competitive and sometimes even manipulative. The last trait is neuroticism. This is a trait characterized by sadness, moodiness, and emotional instability. Individuals who are high in this trait tend to experience mood swings, anxiety, irritability, and sadness. And those who are low in this trait tend to be more stable and emotionally resilient. As we think about the relationship between these traits and our progression into emerging adulthood and early adulthood, what research supports is that neuroticism and openness tends to decrease with age, and conscientiousness tends to increase. But of course, life events like divorce or illness or other big events may produce their own changes. And conscientiousness is an important trait that predicts very important life outcomes. People who are high in this trait tend to be more prone to having job success, better health and longevity, and they're more likely to experience greater quality relationships. As one moves into emerging and young adulthood, a key focus becomes the formation of intimate relationships. So an important topic is attachment. Attachment is a deep emotional bond between two people. This idea was pioneered by John Bowlby, but his attachment theory, as well as Mary Ainsworth's ideas about attachment styles, mostly focused on the relationship between an infant and an adult caregiver. Since Bowlby introduced the concept, psychologists have extended attachment research into adulthood. This research has led to the specification of categories of attachment styles. In this diagram, you'll see 3 categories of attachment styles, with one category, anxious and ambivalent, being a combination of what has typically been considered 2 distinct styles. While John Bowlby and Mary Ainsworth's pioneering work focused on the development of infant attachments, Bowlby suggested that attachment impacts human experience throughout the lifespan. The research on adult attachment has demonstrated that some, but not all, adult relationships function like attachment relationships. And as a result, adults exhibit individual differences in attachment relationships, just like young children do. I would encourage you to take a moment and pause this video and look at each of these attachment styles and think about your own attachment. This will help you to better understand each of these styles and to see their application in the real world. Research on adult attachment styles has shown that there are 2 dimensions on which these styles develop. One dimension is attachment-related anxiety. Those who are high in this dimension are more insecure and worried about their relationship partner's availability and attentiveness. The other dimension is attachment-related avoidance. Those who are high on this dimension have difficulty opening up and being vulnerable with significant others. Interestingly, recent research into child attachment patterns have also discovered that, like adults, children's attachment styles tend to vary along the dimensions of anxiety and avoidance, demonstrating that attachment styles at different ages are based on similar factors. These 2 dimensions give rise to the following 4 adult attachment styles. First, we have secure attachment. Those who have a secure attachment style score low on both anxiety and avoidance. They trust that those they have close relationships with will be there to offer support and security when needed, and they're prepared to offer security and support when their partners need it in return. They find it easy to open up in relationships, and they're good in articulating what they want and need from their partners. They're also confident and optimistic about their relationships, and they tend to find them stable and satisfying. Those who have an anxious, preoccupied attachment style are high in anxiety, but low on the avoidance dimension. These individuals have difficulty trusting their partner's commitment to them. Because they're prone to pessimistic and worried about their relationship, they often need reassurance about their partners, and they'll create or overemphasize conflicts. They may also have issues with jealousy, and as a result, their relationships are often tumultuous. Those who have a dismissive, avoidant attachment style are low on the anxiety dimension, but high on the avoidance dimension. People with this kind of attachment style are often aloof and emotionally distant in relationships. They may claim fear commitment. These individuals may seek to assert their independence by delving into individual activities like work or hobbies or social activities that don't involve significant others. They may come to become focused only on themselves, and they may have passive-aggressive tendencies. Those with a fearful avoidant attachment style are high in both anxiety and avoidance. These individuals show both fear and desire intimate relationships. On the one hand, they want the support and security that comes from having a significant other, but on the other hand, they worry that their significant other will hurt them, and at other times they may feel stifled by the relationship. As a result, people with this attachment style can be inconsistent toward their partners from day to day, and their ambivalent attitude can lead to chaos. Research has demonstrated that attachment in adult romantic relationships functions similarly to attachment in infant caregiver relationships. Although adults don't have the same needs as children, studies have shown that adults with more secure attachment look to their partners for support when they're upset, just as secure infants look to their caregivers. Research has also shown that even though adults with a fearful avoidance style may act defensively, they're still emotionally aroused by conflicts with their significant other. On the other hand, people with dismissive avoidant attachment can suppress their emotions towards a significant other. In this sense, avoidance acts as a defense mechanism that helps the individual alleviate the pain that's brought about by relationship difficulties. A good relationship with parents helps one to transition into adulthood. A well-known researcher in the field of emerging adulthood, and actually someone who coined the phrase emerging adulthood, is named Arnett. And Arnett suggests that instability is a normal part of development, and that parents can't remove the instability of emerging adulthood, and that parents can actually inadvertently increase anxiety by implying that emerging adults are doing something wrong by taking so long to transition, or by experimenting with different jobs or relationships, or by focusing so much on their own growth and development, when these are very normal. Arnett suggests that parents should instead reinforce the idea that experimentation and even failure can be a normal part of the process of growth. They can provide empathy and guidance when the process becomes difficult or frustrating, and if instability mounts into or morphs into anxiety, parents might want to consider stepping in and then providing even greater support, including helping to facilitate access to therapy. So parents serve a very important role during this developmental transition. One thing that you can rely on throughout the lifespan is that people change as they age and grow, and so too do their relationships with their siblings. During emerging and young adulthood, the frequency of sibling interactions tends to decline, and this can be a result of college, a job, or other relationships. However, because sibling relationships increase in their importance as one moves into adulthood, it's important that the bonds remain so that the closeness can later occur. As siblings move throughout adulthood, it will be important for there to be a clear understanding of healthy adult sibling roles. So this begins with reevaluating what existing relationships are. Some siblings get stuck, for example, in childhood roles. For example, the youngest might need protection, or the oldest has the most responsibility. And this can actually lead to some resentments and tension, and even unfair sharing of family responsibilities, especially as we continue to move throughout the lifespan and as adult children are then needing to take care of their aging parents. Healthy sibling relationships begin very early, and parents of children play a very important role in shaping the foundation of these relationships. As you recall, a very influential theorist in the study of personality development throughout the lifespan is Erikson. Erikson maintained that personality develops in a predetermined order through 8 stages of psychosocial development, and this happens from infancy all the way to late adulthood. During each stage, the person, as you've learned, experiences a psychosocial crisis, which could have either a positive or negative outcome for personality development. Intimacy versus isolation is the 6th stage of Erikson's theory of psychosocial development. This stage takes place during young adulthood, between the ages of approximately 18 to 40 years. During this stage, the major conflict centers on forming intimate, loving relationships with another person. During this stage, we begin to share ourselves more intimately with others. We explore relationships leading toward longer-term commitments with someone other than a family member. Successful completion of this stage can result in happy relationships and a sense of commitment, a sense of safety, and a sense of care within a relationship. Avoiding intimacy, fearing commitment, and relationships can lead to isolation and loneliness and sometimes depression. Success in this stage, according to Erikson, will lead to the virtue of love. In thinking about each of Erikson's stages of psychosocial development, how do you think earlier stages can affect one's success in this stage? For example, what role do you think that the stage of trust versus mistrust plays in this stage? And what role do you think identity achievement versus role confusion plays in one's ability to successfully progress through this stage? While there are several factors that contribute to who we select as a partner, there's a significant amount of research within the field of psychology that emphasizes the importance of similarity, self-disclosure, and proximity. So think about this to yourself. What role do you think each of these things play in who we select as a partner? Similarity is very important when it comes to attraction. And while we may find people with personality traits that are somewhat different from our own to be attractive, similarity is more about having similar values and similar beliefs or education or educational goals. When we're similar to another person, we experience what is called consensual validation. And this is where we feel validated by the other person who holds similar beliefs to ours. And this is very helpful to us because it helps us to feel as though our beliefs are being validated. So let's look at proximity. Proximity suggests that the closer two people live to one another, the more likely they are to interact. The more frequent their interaction, the more likely they're going to like one another. And this is because of something called the mere exposure effect. And this is simply a psychological phenomenon where people feel a preference for people or things simply because they're familiar. For example, babies smile at the people who smile at them more. In other research, there's some suggestion that about 40% of people who are married or have a long-term relationship become acquainted with each other in the same job or school or sports center or church. And this research suggests that attraction between people actually increases with the increase in encounters between them. As you've learned, Erikson suggests that during early adulthood, we're in the stage called intimacy versus isolation. During this stage, the focus is on forming close, intimate relationships. And in our 20s or even our 30s, the need for intimacy may be met in friendships and not in romances. Research suggests that there tends to be differences between men and women's friendships. Now, keep in mind that these are generalizations, and we're always going to find deviations from this. But what we tend to see is that for men, friendships are more often comprised of sharing information, providing solutions or problem solving, or focusing on activities. For women, friendships are more often based on sharing weaknesses, emotions, and problems. As some of you may have experienced in your own lives, friendships sometimes diminish once a person has a partner, and friends one had when single or may still be single may be replaced by couple friends. So take a moment and think to yourself, how would you define love? What does it mean for a person to love another person? Though most have experienced it in their lives, defining love can be challenging, and few researchers have put forth a viable theory on the concept of love. One exception, though, is what is called the triangular theory of love. This was developed in the late 80s by psychologist Robert Sternberg. This theory suggests that people can have varying degrees of intimacy, passion, and commitment at any one moment in time. Sternberg's theory suggests that love can actually be put into the shape of a triangle, and we'll look at that in just a moment. And it's made up of three components. The first is intimacy. Intimacy involves feelings of closeness. It also involves feelings of connectedness and feeling bonded to another person. And then we have passion, and this involves feelings and desires that lead to physical attraction and romance. And then we have decision or commitment, and this involves feelings that lead a person to remain with someone and move toward shared goals. If you look at the center of this triangle, you'll see the three components of love. Remember, these are intimacy, passion, and commitment, and these interact in a systemic manner. The presence of a component of love, or a combination of two or more of these components, creates, as you can see here, 7 kinds of love experiences. And these types of love may vary over the course of a relationship. Let's start with friendship. This type of love is when the intimacy or liking component is present, but the feelings of passion or commitment in the romantic sense are missing. And this type of love can be the root of other forms of love. Infatuation is characterized by feelings of lust and physical passion, but without liking and commitment. There's not been enough time for a deeper sense of intimacy, of romantic love, or consummate love to develop. These may eventually arise after the infatuation phase, but they may never arise. The initial infatuation, though, is often very powerful. And let's now look at empty love. So empty love is characterized by commitment, but without passion or intimacy. At times, a strong love deteriorates into empty love. The reverse can also happen. For instance, in an arranged marriage, it may begin with empty love, but then it may flourish into other types of love over time. With romantic love, the bonds that people have are created through intimacy and physical passion. Partners in this type of relationship have deep conversations that help them to know intimate details about the other person. They also have sexual passion and affection, and these couples may be at the point where long-term commitment or future plans are still undecided. And then we have companionate love. This love is intimate, but not passionate in the sense. This type of love includes the intimacy or liking component and the commitment component of the triangle. It's stronger than friendship because there's a long-term commitment, but there's minimal or no sexual desire. This type of love is often found in marriages where the passion has died, but the couple continues to have deep affection or a strong bond together. This might also be viewed as the love between very close friends and family members. Another type of love is fatuous love. In this type of love, commitment and passion are present while intimacy or liking is absent. Fatuous love is typified by a whirlwind courtship in which passion motivates a commitment without the stabilizing influence of intimacy. Often, this can leave people confused who are around them about how the couple could be so impulsive. So the couple may have gotten married very quickly, for example, or made some really big decisions together without having the opportunity to really get to know each other. And unfortunately, sometimes these types of marriages don't work out. And when they do, they may say that it's due to luck, but it may be due to other factors. There are a multitude of factors that contribute to success of a relationship. And then we have what's called consummate love, and this is made up of all three components, and it's the total form of love. It represents an ideal relationship. Couples who experience this kind of love, they have a lot of intimacy, passion, and they also have commitment. They can't imagine themselves with anyone else, and they also can't see themselves truly happy without their partners. They manage to overcome differences, and they face the stressors of life together. Robert Sternberg suggests that love is a verb. So consummate love may be harder to maintain than it is to achieve. And the components of love need to be put into action. Without behavior and without expression, passion can be lost, and love can revert back to the companionate type. I think it's also important to note that the importance of each component of love can differ from person to person and from couple to couple. All three components are required for ideal romantic relationships, but the amount of each component required will differ from one relationship to another, or even over time within a relationship. Knowing how the components interact can help highlight areas that a couple needs improvement in. As many of you've likely noticed, around the world, marriage rates are declining and the rates of singles are increasing. There are several explanations for the increase in singlehood. These include an increasing rate of cohabitation and single parenthood, and an increased focus on careers and education, and some partners selecting not to have children. As marriage rates are declining, cohabitation rates are increasing. Some possible explanations for this include increased individualism, better economic options for women, and increased enrollment in post-secondary education. The rates and attitudes about cohabitation, of course, vary across cultures, and because we live in a multicultural society, there are a variety of different views on this. Throughout the world, there's not only a reduction in marriage rates, but there's also a trend of delaying marriage that's happening in many countries. The greatest decline in marriage rates has taken place in wealthier countries. And the median age at first marriage is increasing. However, we'll likely begin seeing an increase in the overall rate of marriage as same-sex marriages become legal in more states. Endogamy is the practice of marrying within a specific social group, a religious denomination, or in some parts of the world, a caste or ethnic group. In the United States, we see people marrying people outside of their social group. There's a lot of variation, perhaps because we live in a multicultural society, and over time we're seeing more and more deviation from this. In some cultures, there are some pretty strict expectations of marrying within one's social group or within one's caste. Another important influence on marriage, or another issue related to marriage, I should say, is arranged marriages. And arranged marriages are still common in some cultures, as many of you probably know. Arranged marriages we typically may think of as occurring in India, but they're actually probably most notably common in South Asia and in the Middle East. Now, in many other parts of the world, this practice has declined, And this decline was pretty significant in the 19th and 20th centuries. Arranged marriages were very common throughout the world until the 18th century, and they tended to be arranged by people like a person's parents, their grandparents, or other relatives or close trusted friends. For those who are in a committed relationship, whether they're married or not, harmony is likely of great importance. A well-known researcher who has spent 3 decades studying over 3,000 couples and what contributes to relationship success and demise is John Gottman. If you want to know more about this topic, I would encourage you to look into his books. He's written many great books on this topic that can provide you with some really great suggestions. John Gottman suggested that what contributes to relationship or marital failure are what he calls the 4 horsemen. You might also hear these called the 4 marriage killers. These 4 horsemen are contempt, criticism, defensiveness, and stonewalling. These 4 horsemen or marriage killers, what they do is they create a negative pattern of interacting in the relationship that causes partners to stop talking to each other. Hurt feelings, hardened hearts, disappointment, and bitterness can lead to spouses being unable to resolve relationship issues. And then each spouse attempts to protect themselves from the other. And connection and intimacy is often broken, and then loneliness sets in. So let's take a closer look at each of these relationship killers. First, let's look at criticism. So there's a way to tell if a person's partner is being very critical. And so the way that you would tell is you would note that the person may say things that crush their spirit. So the person isn't just telling their partner about what they would like to see different or changed. How you might want them, for example, to stop doing something, or how you might want them to start doing something, but telling them that the reason the issue exists is something about their character. So instead of, I need you to do what you said you would do and empty the trash can when it's full without me saying anything, is said instead of, you never take out the trash, you are as lazy as. This becomes a big problem. So these types of words, this language is very damaging to relationships. And this is part of what we call criticism. And then we have defensiveness. And this is when a spouse refuses to accept any responsibility. So they're being defensive. They're not wanting to take responsibility for their own actions, and often what they might do is blame someone else, or they might counter accuse their spouse so that the issue is complicated by other issues in the marriage. And then there's stonewalling. When a spouse builds a wall between them and their spouse in order to protect themselves in some way, they're stonewalling. This can look like, this could be characterized by the silent treatment. So if someone you've been in a relationship with has not talked to you for some period of time, this is stonewalling. But it can also be expressed in the form of withdrawal in any form. So instead of having the conversation that your relationship needs to have, the partner withdraws to the basement, the man cave, or their bedroom, and they become involved deeply in maybe their device, their phone, or their television show that they're watching. And they move to another part of the house, or maybe they go to the garage and they refuse to talk about the issue. They might also volunteer for extra jobs or take on chores so that they don't have to be around their partner. And then we have contempt. And contempt is any way a spouse tells their partner that they're kind of stupid, they're an idiot, or that they don't matter. And when a spouse sighs, rolls their eyes, or gives you that look that, a look that shuts their partner down, this is contempt. So sarcasm, using quick wit to slash the partner's heart with a word or two or a phrase, this is contempt. talking about one's partner in negative ways to others, this is a form of contempt as well. And of all of the relationship killers, or all these four horsemen, contempt is the worst one. Gottman's research has revealed that couples who are contemptuous of each other are more likely to suffer from infectious illnesses too, like colds and the flu, than couples who are not contemptuous. So contempt is the most poisonous of all relationship killers. This cannot be emphasized enough. It destroys psychological, emotional, and physical health. Another important topic in emerging and early adulthood is parenthood. Since the 1970s, women are having fewer children, and the age at first childbirth has risen. The average age of first childbirth for women is about 26.3 years, and the birth rate for women in their 20s is declining, and it's increasing for women in their 30s. The most likely reasons for these changes include more women pursuing higher levels of education and women focusing on careers before having children, and the increased use of birth control so that women have the opportunity to plan when and how many children they would like to have. If we become parents, who we become parents is determined by a variety of factors. These factors include our own personality traits, our experiences growing up, the child's characteristics, socioeconomic factors, and cultural expectations. We can divide the influences on parenting into three major categories that include parent characteristics, child characteristics, and the contextual or sociocultural characteristics. Parent characteristics include personality, the parent's experiences growing up, the parent's mental health, their beliefs and knowledge, their gender, and their age. Think about how each of these individual characteristics may have influenced your own parents or caregivers. And if you are a parent, how do you think each of these characteristics have influenced you and how you parent? Child characteristics include a child's temperament. Those are the inborn predispositions that they have to respond to the environment in a particular way. And you learned about these, being easy, difficult, or slow to warm up. Another is the child's gender, as well as the child's skills and their behavior, their age, and their health. So each of these child characteristics play an important role in how parents parent. Think about, again, your own experiences as a child. How did your own characteristics affect how your parents parented? And again, if you're a parent, how do your child's characteristics affect your own parenting behaviors? And then we have contextual or sociocultural characteristics that influence parenting. And these include the parent's social network, the parent's work setting. For example, how supportive is their work on the unique needs of parents? The neighborhood that they live in. For example, how safe is the environment or the neighborhood? The school that the child attends and the interactions that the parent has with the school, and the overall culture within which the parent lives. Again, think of your own upbringing. Imagine yourself living in a different community. Maybe you grew up in a small town. Imagine how different your experience would have been with your parents. If you'd grown up in a city, would they have parented differently? Or vice versa? And how do your current characteristics, if you are a parent, how do your current cultural characteristics influence how you parent? In this review, you learned about personality in emerging and early adulthood and the 5-factor theory of personality. You also learned about adult attachment styles and the potential relationship between infant and adult attachment relationships. You also learned about the influences on interpersonal attraction and mate selection. You learned also about Erikson's stage of intimacy versus isolation. And you learned about some explanations for the changes in the number of children that couples are having and why many people are having children at a later age. And you also learned about several factors that influence parenting.